I think a lot of luck in my life as well throughout a lot of the things I've experienced. And so there's a little bit of preparation and luck, opportunity, timing. It all kind of comes together.
Yeah.
Let's get into this because this is a kind of a big topic, and we have a time constraint on this. But I want to talk about, from your perspective, what are some of the most significant security threats we see from the southern border right now?
Yeah, I think that the top line, you can put it all into one sentence: the inability currently and for some time now of the U.S. government to know who is crossing our border and entering the country. That's it, right? I mean, if you want to go with a top line story here, the idea that we're vetting people, look, that CBP folks will admit, that's not happening. At best, someone comes in and maybe we check the name supposedly that they have against a U.S. criminal database. And if they haven't been in the U.S. and haven't convicted a crime, they're not on the database. We don't have the ability to reach back to wherever they're coming from and do a variety of due diligence, of background investigation before letting somebody in. And the government's already admitted that they are getting people showing up without identification, and they're taking their word. The person says, "This is my name." And they're going, "Okay, well, you don't have any identification, so all right." And then they let them in the country, oftentimes with a free airline ticket to go somewhere. So that is, if you don't know who's entering your country, you can't be maximizing your ability, which is the government's prime directive, is to protect its citizens. You can't do that. You're failing. Right? If you don't know who's crossing your border, because a small percent, I'm not saying everybody, but a small percentage of those individuals you can guarantee have nefarious intent.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine, just from your experience alone of all the stuff that you've done in your life, there's certain countries that you are probably more keen to be aware of. And, in recent years, we have had countries from all over the world that we have not seen crossing our borders now. What are some of those countries that you would say that we should probably pay a little bit of attention to that might have nefarious, and not all of them, obviously, but would lead you to believe like that's someone to pay attention to?
Right. Look, and that's the thing. People who roll their eyes when you talk about national security or you talk about the border, right? Some of them fall in the category of well-meaning. Some of them fall in the category of morons and gormless idiots, right? Some of them have their own agenda, whatever that agenda may be, right? And they're willing to dismiss this. But there is no national security without a secure border. So when you talk about the countries that we're seeing, obviously from going back through the global war on terror, right? I mean, there's certain countries in that fold, right, that you have to be concerned with, and whether that would be Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Lebanon to some degree. Although I got to tell you, the Lebanese people are fantastic for the most part. It's a beautiful country that's, again, falling apart because of an Iranian-backed proxy group. I'm disappearing down a rabbit hole there. But the traditional countries where we've had to deal with radical Islamists, right? Those are obviously on there. Coming from the South, Venezuela, look, a third of Venezuela has left that country over the recent past because of the desperate conditions there. But we're also getting a criminal element coming up from Venezuela and some other countries in Central America and South America. That's a problem. That's on the criminal side for the most part, rather than the terrorism side. You've got China, and we've seen ridiculous numbers of Chinese crossings coming in, particularly through the San Diego sector, that area. And I could tell you some stories over the years of how aggressive and how patient and how creative the Chinese intel apparatus is in taking advantage of our essentially open society to do everything from espionage to just theft of intellectual property, a variety of things that they engage in. And so that's a problem. So you kind of have these different buckets, different locations. It's not just, I think, as sometimes people imagine, a fundamentalist, a radical, Islamist extremist who's, looking to come in to commit some act of terror. It's a variety of other reasons why people come in. Maybe they're coming in to assist in their efforts to map out our critical infrastructure, because that's a real threat to U.S. national security. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's good. You know, in your experience with what you do now, also in your past, you know, what are the issues that we see at the border that we need to stop? And I say that more so, where are we falling short in our strategy, right? Because I know the Border Patrol does its job to the best they can. After apprehension, that changes because of certain policies. But so what are some strategies that you see that are a weakness of ours?
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to political dysfunction, right? Because as you've just pointed out, we could do the job, right? If the relevant agencies had sufficient resources, you can secure the border, right? You can bring personnel and technology and physical security, to play and have a secure border. Other countries do it, it's just that for whatever reason, we seem to be incapable of it. And part of it is also, it gets kind of gridlocked up in Washington, D.C., because, people push back and say, well, it's an immigration problem and we should be welcoming, well, of course we should be, right? That's how the country was built up. That's an old saying, and it's true, right? But you can have a secure border and you can have a fair and reasonable and effective immigration system. But we don't have that, because we tend to send midwits to Washington, D.C. for the most part. There's some very good politicians, don't get me wrong, but for the most part. And so I think there's some basics. You have to ask yourself, well, how do we properly resource? If what they're doing is they're saying we're letting people into the country because we don't have, as an example, enough detention beds, right? We don't have enough places to put people. Well, okay, then maybe you've got to limit the number of people coming in that would get put in that category. So maybe you need something akin to the Remain in Mexico policy, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you need to be serious about this idea that when you're seeking asylum, you go to the first safe jurisdiction, the first safe area, right? And people are crossing through a variety of safe countries to get to the States and then claiming asylum. And we're like, yeah, okay, fine. Please come back to court and see us in 3 years. If people actually understood how asinine, the political policies have made the process that good people are trying to deal with, right, within the agencies, they'd be astounded. I think sometimes people say, well, people are very critical of government. I don't think they're critical enough.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree. With the new president in Mexico starting, do you believe that some of her new politics, her new policies might help with this issue?
I don't think so. I don't think we should be looking for any sea change there.